Leader of the Opposition.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, through to the Premier. Well, I'm going to move on from that subject, but I do have to note that an alert system, if we're not going to use it when 600 people have lost their lives as a result of a heat dome, and frankly, we're not going to use it with some of the worst flooding in the history of the province, when I had a farmer telling me from Abbotsford that they could hear the sirens over in next door in Washington State warning their people about the flooding that was taking place, and him saying, there's got to be something happening here because I can hear the sirens next door. That's small comfort, cold comfort to people, frankly. Premier, I'd like to talk about autism now. This is an issue that is very close to my heart, and I'm sure the Premier's too, because I know that he must know parents that have children with autism. Autism is a medical condition that is on a spectrum. So it's very individual in terms of how autism is with each particular child. And one of the lessons we learned, and one of the reasons we brought in individualized funding, is because we recognize that every child is unique. It's very particular to this particular health condition, that every child is unique, and therefore the individualized funding was so critical to parents who know their kids best, who know their children best, that they can get the services that meet the needs of their specific child. And I can tell you, Premier, the parents are so upset and so furious about a very top-down, callous announcement that was made to end direct autism funding by 2025. And the minister who's responsible for this file only took the time to meet with parents after the announcement making these sweeping changes were actually made. And it's shocking that such a dramatic change takes away from the well-established supports and the relationships that these children, these autistic children, have made with the very specialized instructors that they work with to help them deal with their autism. Those relationships take years to build. Switching someone out can be a very traumatic event for children with autism. And so that's why these parents are horrified at this change and want the Premier to know from me, because I've heard from so many of them, hundreds and hundreds, that are scared for their future. And the Premier, you need to know this, because I want to be clear, Chair, through to the Premier, that I don't hold the Premier personally responsible for this, because I know what it's like. I don't know what it's like to be a Premier. I've been a Deputy Premier, but I know you got a lot of things in your desk, and you got a lot of things to deal with, and you can't possibly be aware of everything that's going on. So I want to say that. But I want the Premier to know that the minister who is responsible for this is seriously mishandling this file. And I'm bringing this to the attention on the basis that I know that the Premier is a caring person, and that he, once being made aware of this, will, I think, understand the urgency with which I plead with the Premier. Despite the pressure that parents and service providers have been making to try and bring awareness to the government, they're being ignored. And I do want to say to the Premier, and I really mean this, that it's never the wrong time to do the right thing. And this is an issue that I think the Premier could emerge and really be a hero here, because they want to move to a new hub system, and while the hub system will work for some neurodiverse children, it is not going to work for parents with autistic children, who each of these children really do have very unique needs. And so I'd like to ask the Premier, will he join me, because I want to make this a bipartisan thing, will the Premier join me and meet with the parents of autistic children who can explain firsthand to both of us just how devastating this decision will be, and before the government goes down this path and makes what will be, I promise, a huge mistake for the parents of autistic children. Will the Premier do that? Join me, meet with the parents of autistic children, hear them out, and then he can go back and decide whether his minister is making the right decision. I will clear my schedule to make myself available to do that.
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I thank the member for bringing these issues forward today. I do know many families with children with special needs, developmental disabilities, Down syndrome, as well as children on the spectrum. So there is a range, as we all know, of families that are struggling for diagnosis, struggling for services. And I appreciate this has been a difficult issue for many families, and I am aware of it. I don't want to, I appreciate the member giving me latitude, but no latitude's required. This is an issue that I am aware of from time in opposition as well as in the Premier's office. We have issued an RFP. There will be a contract let by October for pilots so that we can test out the model, the hub model. The member will know, Honourable Chair, and his caucus particularly will know, that service delivery in rural and remote areas is more challenging than it is in urban centres. So we want to try and find the best mix. So the pilots will be 3 in the Northwest, 1 in Kelowna, to ensure that we test out the hub model to see if it's effective. The reason there's such a long runway on this, and the member has talked today and since his return to the House about speeding things up, accelerating processes. And in many instances, I agree with him. In this instance, I think he would agree with me that stretching this out to better understand the consequences, to make sure that if there are unintended consequences for families and for children, we're aware of it well before the implementation date of 2025. So although I know the minister and her team are reaching out and consulting broadly, this is a process that will be going on for the next 3 years. And during that time, we're hopeful that we can ensure that we're finding any of the challenges, bless you, any of the challenges that the members articulated, we will be on top of, and we will be able to adjust. But for those families out there that are struggling with getting a diagnosis, and those that are not able to have access to the individualized funding model, this transformation is welcome. So it is, as the member will know, always challenging to make sure you strike the right balance. And why we've given the long runway is to ensure that we have every opportunity for decision makers in government, policymakers, and communities to understand what's the best way forward for kids, whatever their challenges may be. And I'm confident that the flat rate of funding, regardless of however we go forward, is not serving all families across the province. We need to find a better way to ensure we're capturing more kids to make sure we can lift them up and celebrate their uniqueness. I know the member would agree with that, and I appreciate his commitment to collaboration between he and I and the families of British Columbia, and I'll certainly take that under advisement.
Leader of the Opposition.
Well, thank you, Premier, and I'm glad to hear through the chair to the Premier that the Premier is aware of it. But Premier, with respect, experimenting with the system causes an enormous amount of anxiety and stress on the parents who are seeing the very clear benefits that their children are receiving as a result of the current system that offers individualized funding. And just so the Premier knows, his own minister has made it very clear that the government is exiting individualized funding and moving to a hub model, a hub system model. Now, just so the Premier knows, the hub model is a model the Ontario Conservative government adopted, and it resulted in skyrocketing waiting times. It is not a good system to follow. I also need the Premier to really understand that this decision was made without a total lack of any meaningful consultation with the parents of autistic children at all. And I just want to read to the Premier. According to the BC Autism Advocacy, and I quote this, the most commonly submitted response from our survey about how parents and service providers felt about the information being given was, quote, traumatizing, and the most commonly referred to word regarding your small table discussions was gaslighting. The First Nations Leadership Council agrees. They wrote, and I quote, inviting us now, let me start over. The First Nations Leadership Council, and I quote, said, in a letter to the minister and to the Premier, they wrote, quote, "Inviting us now to town halls after you have made your unilateral decision demonstrates how disastrously off course your approach is," end of quote. Again, to the Premier, and while I appreciate he says he'll take my recommendation under advisement, it is honestly made in the spirit of us collectively getting to the right decision here. And I'm very concerned that you're not hearing the entire story, Premier, because I have heard it. I have spent over 20 years working with parents in the autistic community. And I can tell you that the happiest day in their life was when they got individualized funding. I have seen the children firsthand, from when they were little kids to now grown up, and I have seen the improvements firsthand. I am pleading with this Premier, please, I'll clear my schedule. Let's make the time to meet with those parents of autistic children so you can hear just how disastrously off course this decision is, how there was a complete lack of any meaningful consultation, and how hurt and how much anxiety they feel, especially when they hear that we're going to proceed with, as the Premier describes it, this experiment.
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And again, I thank the member for raising this issue today. In my estimates, I know that this has been an issue that's been well canvassed, but when we hear of anxieties, we want to ensure that we're reducing those anxieties wherever possible. I want to just correct the record. If the member heard experiment, that certainly wasn't my intention. Pilots are designed to find best practices going forward. I didn't mean that as you may have heard it. I don't believe I said experiment, but we're bringing forward pilots so that we can have a runway to assess whether moving to a needs-based system, which has been recommended by the Representative of Children and Youth, was also discussed by the Standing Committee in this place as a useful way forward. And that's what led us to look at this. We need to ensure that we're capturing as many kids as we possibly can. Diagnosis is critical, but those kids that go undiagnosed with FASD and other challenges are falling through the cracks, and we want to make sure we're capturing that. And as a result, between 2019 and 2021, we had engagements with 1,500 families, 17 reps from family and service organizations, as well as an Indigenous advisory committee. And this past fall, public information sessions, 3 with families and information centers across the province, 1,667 attendees, as well as 4 service provider sessions with totaling 1,411 participants, as well as continuing public engagement. The reason that the long horizon was put in place was so that we could better ensure that we were capturing those kids that are currently, because of a lack of a diagnosis, and these are challenges because of the number of service providers, available to meet the challenges in modern families, and so we believe that this is the best way forward. That's why we brought it into play. That's why we've listened to the Representative for Children and Youth and the Select Standing Committee of this House.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through to the Premier. Well, Premier, it's important you know, because you just listed off a whole bunch of consultations, and I hope that the Premier understands that none of those conversations were telling the parents that they were introducing a hub model and stripping away individualized funding. There was no discussion about that at all, and I would hope the minister responsible is not misleading the Premier into believing that any consultations actually were telling parents there's going to be a hub model system as they have in Ontario, and that they were going to be stripping away individualized funding. It's important the Premier I just want the Premier to understand he should not be forging ahead with a system that's going to reduce one-on-one support. The request for proposal that the Premier referenced for the NDP's hub pilot project locations, which they now are calling family connection centres, explicitly state that the NDP are moving away from one-on-one supports. That's hence the anxiety that people are feeling. And it's the classic, sort of divergence between a government knows best approach or a parent knows best approach. I would argue a parent knows best in this particular case what is in the best interest of their autistic children. And I want to read a letter that I received from an individual, David Carlson, who wrote us to say, and I quote, "I live in South Surrey with my husband Colin and our 7-year-old autistic daughter Becca, whom we adopted through foster care. I'm begging you to stop this attack on our family. By all means, add supports for families who don't yet have the help they need, but don't take from families like ours who are struggling so much as it is just to keep our heads above water." End of quote. Will the Premier do the right thing and just agree that he's going to stop the clawback of autism funding for parents of autistic children?
Premier.
Chair, well, firstly, we are not moving away from one-on-one supports. We're moving away from individualized funding. And that, again, is a direct result of all of those families that cannot currently access care because they don't have a diagnosis. Absolutely, if families are best served by one-on-one care, that's what they should be receiving. But there's a host of other families that are being shut out because of the program as it currently exists. And again, the long runway is to ensure that we're assessing the progress that we're making, to ensure that we're capturing the greatest number of people for the services that they desperately need. Again, I have, and the member has, and other members in this House would have access to friends and family members who have these challenges. And I can appreciate that without due care, we want to ensure that we're talking people through these things. That's why a 3-year runway. That's why we've set it up the way we have. Significant consultation at the front end and continued consultation as we implement the programs.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, through the chair to the Premier, the RFP is clear that you're moving away from a one-on-one system to a group model system. They could not have been more clear with the parents of autistic children that that's exactly what they're doing. Is the Premier not aware that they're moving away from one-on-one, individualized funding, which allows parents to make the decision in the interests of their specific child?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Services available under the new model will include outreach and in-home services, satellite offices, virtual options, as well as one-on-one support. I don't know how more clear we can be. We want to expand. We're taking advice from the Children and the Youth Representative as well as the Standing Committee of this place. We want to make sure that all families in British Columbia get the support that they need for their kids.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through to the Premier. I'll make one last plea to the Premier. Premier, you are listening to bureaucracy that has never liked the individualized funding model because it allows parents to have the decision-making about what's in the best interest of their children. You are going down the wrong path. They did this in Ontario. We saw the results with skyrocketing wait times. It's a government knows best approach that isn't going to work with parents who already have 20 years experience with individualized funding model that has done remarkable things for their children. And you've done it without any consultation to those parents. So I want to say again to the Premier, through the Chair, that parents are upset about this for a reason. You're not listening. The minister that you have in charge of this file has not done any meaningful consultation since the minister made the announcement. With the greatest respect, Chair, would you allow us to have a discussion here? You've been interrupting repeatedly.
If you would like to challenge the chair, you can do so. That's not the rules of the House are the rules. I use the same rules for all members of this House. No member is above the rules of this House.
Through the Chair to the Premier, Premier, you just need to understand that the path you're going down is going to have disastrous results. The Premier is going down a path that is going to have disastrous results for parents of autistic children. Take the opportunity to pause and at least listen to the parents of autistic children. Again, I will clear my calendar. I will make myself available so we can have a joint meeting, do it in a bipartisan way, listen directly, not to your bureaucrats, not to the minister responsible, but directly from parents who are going to be affected by the decision that you're about to make.
Standing Order 36 is to protect all members of this House, and I use it for every member. It is not appropriate to challenge the chair in this way. It disrespects the rules of the House, and it disrespects the people of this House. Members, we're nearly finished the session today. Let's get through and let's respect each other's needs and let's respect the rules of this place. Thank you. Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And again, I don't doubt for a second the passion of the Leader of the Opposition on this question. I'm guided by the work of a bipartisan standing committee of this House with members from all three parties that came back with recommendations. One-on-one engagement with children with autism is not off the table. What is happening is we're trying to set in place a model that will capture families that do not have a diagnosis but are still struggling with challenges for their children. That's the objective. By having 3 years to engage on this, it's the best way to come up with the solutions that are needed in different circumstances wherever people might live. We all know that in a large urban centre, accessing services is a lot easier than it is in rural and remote communities. So finding the best way to ensure that government is distributing the resources that people need to keep their kids moving forward through challenging circumstances, whether it be brain injury, developmental disabilities, Down syndrome, or autism. That's the objective. I have every confidence that the minister responsible, who has spent her professional career working on these issues before being elected to this House, will not shy away from listening and engaging and improving services wherever she has the opportunity.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Chair, through to the member. Well, I've spent many years in government and many years in the private sector. And while I have tremendous respect for the public service, I think they do an exceptional job. I don't listen to everything they say because often they get it wrong. They're human beings just like the rest of us. I do know from watching parents with autistic children over the last 2 decades, I have seen firsthand the results. And it's not just me, as some self-professed expert, it is the parents, hundreds of parents across this province that are pleading with the government not to go forward with this ill-advised decision. And to be clear, the Select Standing Committee that the Premier referenced did not say to move to a hub system. Now, it's one thing to say you care, but it's another thing to say that you care by showing you're taking action that are going to get results. And I think as we are getting near the end of our discussion here on Premier's estimates, you will see once again I'm finding this chasm between the rhetoric and the actual results is getting bigger and larger every time. I'm concerned that we have a situation that the Premier, through the Chair, is out of touch with the needs of British Columbians today. Skyrocketing cost of living, housing that's never been more expensive, fuel prices and gas prices the highest in North America, a healthcare crisis that is spilling right across every part of this province. But I still believe, as we've gone through all of these discussions, that the cruelest of all was to cut individualized autism funding from parents of autistic children. It's causing incredible stress for families. And frankly, I just think it is such an ill-informed, cruel decision that I'm begging the Premier and government to revisit where they're going. And I just don't know how at a time when the Premier, as we canvassed yesterday, through the Chair to the Premier, at a time when they're awarding themselves undeserved raises in the tens of thousands of dollars, and building a $1 billion vanity museum project that nobody wants, that at the same time they can be stripping funding away from parents of autistic children. It's the wrong set of priorities, Premier.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Yes, there is a question from the Chair through to the Premier. The question, Premier, is take the opportunity of the offer that I've made to sit down on a nonpartisan basis where both of us can listen to those parents, 2 hours maximum of your time, to listen to those parents and understand the challenges, the worries, the concern, and how upset they are at a unilateral decision being made without any consultation, and how that's going to negatively impact their children. Will the Premier commit to 2 hours of his time, anytime when it's most convenient, whether it's here, the Lower Mainland? We will do whatever it takes to ensure that those parents at least can say somebody listened to them before this disastrous decision gets implemented?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Well, to the Leader of the Opposition through you, listening has been what we've been doing since 2019. I inventoried the number of engagements that took place then. I've inventoried the number of engagements that took place in the fall of this year. The Select Standing Committee of this House, with members from all three political parties, reviewed this situation. The youth advocate, the children and youth advocate, brought forward suggestions and recommendations. Our objective here is not to take away one-on-one care. It's to ensure that we can expand funding to make sure that those who haven't got the benefit of a diagnosis can get the services that they need. Not just those with autism, but those with brain injury, those with Down syndrome, those with other developmental disabilities. Families need support wherever they may be. We believe the hub model can achieve that without diminishing the importance of one-on-one individualized care.